everything comes to the floor in such a hyper-partisan manner.
I would argue that it's already in the Constitution. We've overtaxed people. People like to legislate by emotion.
It's important to address when the governor oversteps his boundaries.
I'll pull up my pocket version here. 1,000-page omnibus bills that nobody knows what's in it. Well, thank you for joining us on another episode of the Omnibus Podcast, where all subjects are germane. This week, we'll be hosting with Walter Hudson. Walter, thanks for joining again.
Glad to be here, as always. Looking forward to our conversation.
So last week, we talked about the Fauci email, 3,200 emails that were released through a Freedom of Information Act and all the fallout and people just piling on online and sharing their favorite emails, showing that Fauci had all these warnings about it being made in a lab in Wuhan, and how he was emailing people telling them that masks don't work. Meanwhile, telling the president and at press conferences pushing this narrative that we need to lock things down. I thought he'd be, in jail by now. What happened? I mean, what do you think is going on with the fallout from Fauci?
A similar phenomenon to the fallout, quote unquote, from the death of Jeremy Epstein, which is it's really obvious to anybody who looks what's going on, and there's never going to be any investigation into it or any official action taking place, and nobody's ever going to pay any price for it, because there are for the exact same reason in both cases, in both Jeremy Epstein's situation or Jeffrey Epstein. Make sure I get it right. Jeffrey Epstein's situation and Dr. Fauci's situation. In both cases, there are simply too many people in positions of power who stand to lose. Because if you hold Anthony Fauci accountable for the lies, which he told Congress, and the lies which he told the American people, and the lies upon which public policy was based in the several states, and certainly at the federal level, then it's not going to stop at Fauci, right? Like the next logical question is going to be, well, this guy, nobody elected this guy, so why was he the guy who we were all turning to be the COVID savior who was going to protect us all from the pandemic? And another reason why we're not going to get any follow-up on that is because the true answer to that is bipartisan. It's not something where you can just pin it on Democrats or pin it on Republicans. Across the board, luminaries in both parties, including, dare we say, former President Donald Trump, all place their trust in this con artist, this liar, this fraud, this hack, and made major, significant, life-altering, economy-crushing public policy decisions on the basis of his deception. And so they would have to also be held accountable for that. And so that's why nobody's going to turn on Fauci, because it would ultimately mean burning down the house in which they reside or throwing glass in the house in which they live, throwing stones in a glass house, as it were.
Well, I think you definitely nailed the point that Fauci worked for a Republican president. And so it's very difficult to criticize, his actions and what he's done and how it changed public policy at the federal level without owning some of that as a Republican, right? It's just, we see that on a lot of issues that are on being pushed by both parties. And we had a lot of Republican governors that locked their states down too. There's only a few that have been strong supporters of liberty and freedom throughout this whole pandemic. I hope that more bubbles up from this, and I hope it keeps getting traction. But I unfortunately do see what you pointed out as the Jeffrey Epstein similarities of just sweeping it under the rug and next pandemic or next variant, right? You've seen some news on variants and possibly locking things down again this fall as natural influenza and other things pop up. And of course, COVID will probably come back to some extent. There'll be another, outbreak of COVID in other countries or in the United States.
Well, and that remains an open question. It's one thing to go back and hold Fauci and others accountable for the decisions that they made over the course of the past 18 months. But now that we know that all this is based on lies, now that we know that masks don't work, that lockdowns don't work, that asymptomatic spread isn't a thing, that the lethality of COVID and the veracity of its spread is nowhere near what the ridiculous models that fueled all of this insanity in the first place were predicting. Now that we know all of that, will it be palatable? And now that people have gotten a taste of normalcy again after being traumatized for the past year and a half, will it be politically viable to go backwards and to say, well, we're locking down again, we're going to send your kids back to school with face diapers on and all of this stuff. And look, it's a bad time for me to express much faith in the capacity of my fellow man to stand up for their own liberty. But at the same time, anecdotally, I've had a lot of conversations with people across the spectrum who seem now, at least privately, willing to acknowledge, yeah, this was much ado about nothing. This was certainly inflated in terms of the degree of danger that was presented to the public. Masks are silly. Lockdowns weren't really necessary. So people are willing to admit these things privately, which means that in their heart of hearts, they're going to be, instead of making decisions based upon fear, there's going to be some degree of analytical consideration taking place, some degree of critical thinking is going to be coming to bear in response to any suggestions that we ought to go backwards in terms of these policy excesses that we've seen over the past 18 months.
Well, I live near Mankato, and our big paper in Mankato is called the Mankato Free Press, and it's much like a small Star Tribune as far as its far left liberal leaning editorials. So their editorial board wrote they do these hour view articles of how we as the editorial board feel, and theirs was all about how government has done everything right during the pandemic, and it was like. They actually said we give credit where credit is due. And then they credited Biden for, quote, encouraging multiple pharmaceutical companies to develop a vaccine instead of crediting, the accurate POTUS who did it, which was Trump. So, I mean, they talk about how all the things that they did right. And then they end by saying, government isn't perfect, but we sometimes need to give credit where credit's due. And the government's response to the biggest public health crisis in a century showed that government can be the solution. I just can't believe how over the top they went in promoting government as being right the same week that the Fauci emails showed that government got it wrong.
Right.
And it's sickening. I didn't even write a response to them because, they don't print our stuff anyways, but it's disgusting. I still see a Metro lawmaker called me and said, hey, I just want to know, when you go shopping around Mankato and stuff, are people still wearing masks? And I said, about 20% of the people are still walking around with masks. And he's just like, oh man, it's about the same in the Metro and even more so. But people are still wearing masks. I went in to ship a bunch of Amazon returns back from the UPS store. And, someone walked in carrying, 20, 30 pounds of packages, wearing a mask, huffing in this 100-degree heat. And it's just like, it's over, man. Don't you know that? I can't believe that people are still walking around wearing masks and driving in cars with their family wearing masks after all of this, after they've been vaccinated. And the only thing I can think of is that the mask is the MAGA hat of the left. And that is, they're proud of wearing it. And they would hate to be confused at being a conservative by not wearing it.
Who was it? Who's that kid from Parkland who achieved some level of notoriety for a while? David Hogg, I think that's the guy's name. He actually said that. He came out and tweeted after the CDC changed their guidelines that he was going to keep wearing the mask explicitly for that purpose. He's like, I don't want to be confused with a conservative, so I'm going to continue to display my religious talisman, my cult identity card, so that I don't get confused with one of these normies out there. And I also tend to have that reaction when I see people out and about. I'm at a gas station or a grocery store or something. I still see some, one or two people masked here and there. My mind does go to that of, are they just virtue signaling or whatever? But, unlike the left, which frequently tries to put us in a box. They see somebody in a MAGA hat and they just assume that, all of the Confederacy and Nazi Germany are manifest in that red cap on their head. I try to grant some benefit of the doubt to people. Look, there are legitimate reasons why you might want to wear a mask, right? There always were legitimate reasons why you might want to wear a mask. If you're in a high risk group, if you're elderly,
or you're protesting,
if you are
cocktails.
Yeah. I mean, if you're somebody who has an underlying medical condition, you're diabetic, you have all sorts of issues that could come to bear that would cause you to be more cautious than others. And so, it doesn't offend me that people are still wearing masks. It never offended me if somebody who was choosing to decided that they were going to wear a mask. It wasn't something that I try not to judge people on that basis. And that's what separates us from the other side, is that there was nothing but judgment from those who were claiming that you have to follow the CDC's guidance and you have to follow Governor Walz's mandate. And if you don't, then you're killing grandma. And I guess we're all killing grandma now by their own logic.
Yeah. Well, I hope just those who are really trying to protect someone who cannot be vaccinated or will not be vaccinated, that, they wear masks. They have a right to do that. But I'm glad the mask mandates are gone, and I hope that they do not come back this fall, regardless of what happens with a new variant or seasonal influenza comes and kills 80,000 people like it does on average. That people understand social distancing works, wash your hands. And if you're extremely vulnerable, you can wear a mask, but we shouldn't be mandating it. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about some gun issues that have popped up. There's been, of course, this string of shootings in the metro, young kids dying, and it's been in the news quite a bit, and people getting shot, bystanders getting shot, getting caught in the crossfire. And as happens in every post-shooting, the media comes forward and says, we need to end gun violence. And what can we do? Legislatively, we already have a ton of gun regulations. We have too many gun regulations, and many of the gun laws aren't even being enforced. When they arrest someone, they're not, they drop the gun possession charges. They don't go after the person that sold them. I think less than 1% of the felons that are caught with guns when they shouldn't have them, less than 1% of the time they go and actually prosecute the person that sold them the gun or gave them the gun. And that's an issue. So that they have brought up an issue of straw purchasing, which is when you go into a gun store to buy a gun for the purpose of giving it to or selling it to someone who is a prohibited person. If you know that person can't buy a gun because, I tried to buy a gun and they won't let me because I was a felon. Well, I'll get you a gun, then you're a straw purchaser. And they're trying to figure out how they can go after or tighten the restrictions and identify more straw purchases. My concern around that, and I talked to the Star Tribune today, I think they have an article coming out this weekend. They want to, figure out how they can tighten that up. And if it goes to the retailer, they're going to basically be telling retailers, look, you need to be more you need to have more scrutiny on the people that are coming in there when there's a husband and wife and the husband is picking out the gun, but the wife fills out the paperwork. Maybe the husband is prohibited. And so you should maybe deny that person the transaction, right? And
so say, we're going to turn retail workers into ATF officers now? That's how that's going to work?
Well, they're a federal firearm, dealer, so they are, but you're right. I mean, basically my conversation with the Star Tribune was, I don't want to propose any racist legislation that's going to require that someone be profiling, right? You send in, a white couple, and then you send in two black guys from the street that are, trying to buy a gun, and then it turns out, no, you buy this one or whatever. They're going to try to shut down that transaction. I don't know how it's going to work, but it's just ugly when you try to have people profiling. We have a law that says you fill out this paperwork, and if you lie in this form, you're a lifetime felon. You don't get to buy a gun again. And let's enforce that law, right? This homeless woman they found that she bought like 75 guns in the last month. She went in and then sold them all for $100 over retail to make money. That prosecute her, put her in jail. but we have laws on the books already, and we need to enforce them.
Yeah, and here's why, when you bring that up about the racial profiling aspect, it's not something that you're just conjuring out of thin air. The when you the argument against the drug war and against drug prohibition is rooted in this, right? It's the idea that when you have subjective laws, and by that I mean a law that requires an enforcement officer to make a subjective judgment about whether or not somebody is a violator. Uh, and that particularly happens when anytime you have a situation where instead of a victim calling 911 and saying, hey, I'm being robbed, hey, somebody's breaking into my house, hey, somebody just stole my car, hey, somebody's shooting at me. Anytime that you have a category of crime where instead of having a victim call the 911 to get police assistance, you instead have officers patrolling, looking for violators. That's a subjective scenario where it's the officer decides whether or not they're going to engage with the person as opposed to responding to a complaint. And in the situation that you outline where the retailer is making these judgments about this couple versus that couple, well, on what basis are they deciding that this couple seems suspicious and that one doesn't? It's a subjective judgment, right? And so it opens the door for all sorts of biases to enter, which should have no role in the decision making process whatsoever.
Yeah, and I think that would quickly cause large retailers like Fleet Farm and Shields and I don't know if Walmart sells guns anymore, but these large retailers to just get out of the business of selling guns if they have to really profile their customers.
Well,
And
and that might be the point.
yeah, that could be the point. So the Hennepin County attorney came in to testify in the Public Safety Committee 2 years ago and was asked, why don't you prosecute these straw purchases? And he said, well, because the penalties aren't high enough. So he really didn't care. He wasn't going after him. But one of the reasons why some straw purchases happen, obviously you've got criminals, like hardened criminals that can't buy guns, but you also have people that are prohibited from buying guns because they, under Minnesota law, legally use cannabis, medical cannabis, right, to treat ailments, PTSD of all these veterans that have given up, opiates and all these other drugs to try medical cannabis to help with PTSD. Because their names are on the medical cannabis registry, they are prohibited from owning guns because it's illegal federally. And when you fill out the application to buy or get a gun transferred to you, one of the questions is, do you use marijuana or other illicit drugs? And then it puts in parentheses, marijuana is illegal in every state because it's illegal federally. And if you answer yes, you use it, you don't get a gun. And if you say no and you lie, you become a lifetime felon and you're denied guns for the rest of your life. So
Right.
that conundrum. And so if somebody wants to go buy a shotgun to go hunting, and they can't because they are on the medical cannabis registry because a doctor has said they have a qualifying condition, chronic pain or whatever, and ask them, hey, do you want to be on the registry? Do you think you might want to try it? Maybe put my name on there. I might, if it gets bad, I'll go try it. They might not even get a prescription filled, but their name is on there and they're denied a gun. So their wife goes and buys a gun and gives it to them. Now she has committed this felony. That is a big issue. Now we only have 50,000 people in Minnesota on the medical cannabis registry because the only medical cannabis you can buy is this really expensive processed oil. You can't smoke it. Not yet. But the Republicans in the Senate passed a backdoor legalization bill to expand medical cannabis to allow you to smoke it. So starting next March, I believe, is when it kicks in. If your name is on the registry, you can smoke it legally in Minnesota. Of course, you could go to the two companies that will be able to lawfully sell it, and maybe get your prescription bottle with it in there. But after that, if you stuff it with black market weed, nobody's going to be able to tell. And so basically it backdoor legalized it. And anybody whose name is on that is the number of people in that registry is going to explode. So there'll be doctors that'll just, like Dr. Nick, that'll authorize you or certify that your condition qualifies you for medical cannabis, and there'll probably be 250,000 or more names on that registry a year from now, and all of those people will be prohibited. So there will likely be more straw purchases. Trying to sort those out from, now they're all illegal, but sorting out those from the the gangbangers in the Twin Cities who buy guns on the street or trade them like currency. We need to figure that out in how to get guns out of the hands of hardened criminals. And what we see with the medical cannabis side of things down in Mississippi, when they expanded their medical cannabis program, they're now basically issuing red flag orders, and they're going into people's homes who are on the registry. And I don't know if they can see if it's because of PTSD or pain or whatever, but they're entering the homes and taking guns. So it's a serious issue, and we need to address that side of things. Walter, what do you think?
Well, my thoughts go to first causes, right? So when you talk about the straw man purchasing, for instance, how big of a problem is that really? And I don't want to hear how often it happens. I want to hear how often a violent crime occurs tied to a straw man purchase. That's what I want to know. How big of a problem is this really? And if we were to clamp down on it, how many violent crimes would we be preventing by doing so? And that would be my similar question for all of these proposals: is, where's your data showing that a mass shooting or some other particular violent crime would not have been able to occur or would not have occurred if we had this new law that you're talking about in place? Or is the situation such that all of these incidents of violence involving guns have occurred in spite of the fact that we have this law and this law over here, all pertaining to gun usage and purchases and whatnot, which people are just ignoring and flaunting and doing what they want to do anyway? If that's the case, if this isn't actually going to have the effect of making the public safer, making my family safer, then I don't know how interested I am in pursuing any of it. It just sounds like, at best, a way to make people feel good that we did something about gun violence, even though it doesn't, if the statistics go the way that I suspect that they do. Or at worst, being an underhanded way to violate Second Amendment rights, just kind of nipping away at them, death by a thousand cuts style.
Well, I think that straw purchases are a serious issue. I think it's a significant amount of guns that are on the street. I mean, there's the primary market for guns and a secondary market. A primary market would be new guns coming from the manufacturer, and once they're purchased originally, then they can be sold in the secondary market, either privately. I could sell my guns to you without going through an FFL dealer, or I could trade them to a dealer for a different gun, and so then the dealer is selling used guns too. But I mean, I think that there's so many inexpensive guns that are for sale that are new, that people are, I think there is an issue with people buying multiple guns. Now, I think what the idea he was floating is, should there be a maximum? Like, this woman she bought 75 guns in a month. Is that too many too soon? I said, no, because there's legitimate reason, and there should not be a limit on, because one gun can kill someone. So what is it, 12? Like, it's arbitrary and it's dumb. Yeah. It's like the smurfing law that went in for meth, right? We need to prevent people from making meth out of pseudoephedrine. So we should say, how much pseudoephedrine should you be able to buy in a month? Because they had people that were, I guess the term is smurfing, where you go around all these drugstores and you buy multiple boxes of Sudafed from all these drugstores. And so now it's all reported to a central registry. And if any one person buys too much, they get cut off. I get cut off because I buy a prescription because my wife, uses Claritin. And then if I need to go get another box because we're traveling, they go, I'm sorry, you bought too many this month. It's like, it's Sudafed,
Right.
And they don't even make meth out of it anymore. They make it out of some other junk because they made Sudafed too hard to get. So I don't believe in putting more restrictions on it. In fact, I believe we should always focus on getting the guns out of the hands of bad people, truly bad criminals. Right. But On the other side, we should also work on getting guns into the hands of good people, because that brings balance. And so that brings me to the next point, where there was a lawsuit filed in the last week by several young Minnesota gun owners who would like to be able to carry their gun with them for self-defense. So if you have a woman that went and served in the military for 2 years overseas fighting for American freedom, and she comes back, she's 20 years old, she's working in retail, closes a store late at night, and she wants to be able to carry her handgun with her to the car for safety, she is unable to get a carry permit under Minnesota law. It used to be, I think, 18-year-olds could get one, but when they went from a can issue to a shall issue state, where the sheriff is required to issue a carry permit, they raised it to 21. Why? Are you not an adult at 18? You can vote, you can buy a house, you can start a company, you can hire people, you can do a lot of things at 18. You can have a family, but you can't protect yourself. And young people have been, getting shot in the Twin Cities. They're concerned for their safety, just like everybody else is. Why should we prevent people between 18 and 20 from carrying a firearm for safety?
Yeah, well, the answer is we shouldn't, of course. And I find it particularly fascinating to look at the juxtaposition between, oh, no, we can't let people buy guns until they're 21 years old, versus something like, if my 4-year-old decides that he's a girl, we should immediately start moving towards psychological and physical alterations to try to fake conformity with that fantasy. The idea that, on the one hand, we need to respect the lived experience and whims and feelings of anybody who promotes a certain idea or has a certain thought in their head, versus, somebody's 21 years old, 20 years old, but they don't have the judgment necessary to secure and properly wield a weapon for their own self-defense. Seems like a pretty stark contrast. I think we need to, at the very least, decide which one of those standards we're going to uphold. Upholding them both makes us look pretty psychotic as a society.
Yeah, and in the legislature in the last year, we've heard bills saying that you can't buy cigarettes until you're 21, because 18-year-olds' brains haven't finished developing. Even at 20, their brain hasn't finished developing yet. They can't make adult decisions. So we moved to, I shouldn't say we, because I voted no, but most Republicans and I think all the Democrats voted to raise the smoking age to 21, because people aren't smart, developed enough. They're not mature enough. But at the same time, they wanted to lower the voting age to 16, because evidently, even though their brains haven't been developed yet, they're
Right.
smart enough to pick the president of the United States and their elected officials. So conflict. We just need to choose what the age of being adult is. It used to be 21 to vote. You had to be 21 years old to vote. That was basically you're an adult then. And back in the 60s, of course, with being able to be drafted to serve in our military at 18, they changed the voting age to 18 to match that. And the drinking age used to be 18 until it was pushed to 21. So it goes back and forth, but we just need to choose the age of adulthood and then stick with it for everything, contracts, everything. And in Europe, they can't drive until they're 18. So that's a difference, that we actually are more liberal to allow 16-year-olds to drive.
I mean, I'll even go for the deal. I'll pick 31. Let's make 31 be the age where it's legal to do everything. And before that, you can't sign contracts, you can't vote, you can't hire, you can't have guns, whatever. Because we got plenty of people who are extending their adolescence into their late 20s and early 30s anyway. So if this is the new standard, they tell people, oh, go out and live your life. Don't worry about getting married and having kids and starting a career. When you're 20, that's you're being way too serious. You need to take your time and sow your wild oats. All right, fine, but you're not going to have any responsibilities that might result in serious consequences for me as I'm moving forward with my life, having kids and trying to be responsible.
Right.
Obviously that I'm being a little bit facetious on that. At least the 31 part, I pretty much mean everything else. But the point is yes, there should be. We do need to be arbitrary to an extent, because there does need to be a defined line, and we need to pick a number. But to your point, that number should be the same number for just about all of these things. You either have the capacity to make rational decisions on your own behalf, or you don't. And past a certain age, then it should become the burden of proof should be placed on the state to determine that you don't have the capacity to make those decisions.
Yeah, and I come from this as being when I was like a 40-year-old, 18-year-old. I was very old for my age, and actually not even 18. I moved out of the house when I was 15 to go away to school. I went to college early, so I was like 17 years old, living on my own in Minneapolis. I was managing an apartment building. I had a retail job. I got my real estate license, and like the week I turned 18, bought a house when I was 18 before I graduated high school. And I remember when I was 17 years old, a freshman at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, and I was buying like school supplies, and they wouldn't let me buy the rubber cement because you have to be 18 years old in Minnesota
Right.
to buy rubber. Well, you have to have your parents come in and buy that for you. I said, my parents live 2 hours away. You know,
Right.
like I'm on my own, but I'm not, because I can't buy, rubber cement or beer. And it was, so I kind of fit into this category. I was a real estate agent. I would show anybody in Minneapolis a house. I would go into, vacant HUD homes, in bad neighborhoods, and show a complete stranger, the house at, 6 o'clock at night in the wintertime when it's pitch black outside. I couldn't carry a gun, but I used to sell tasers. So I carried a taser with a laser sight in a shoulder holster with me as my self-defense. But and I was mugged before I was 21. And but so I was a prime candidate for what would be this lawsuit, where
Right.
I want to fight to be able to carry a gun for self-defense.
Yeah. Well, Godspeed. I hope they have success.
Yeah, so they are currently suing. Is it the county sheriffs in several counties that these complainants live in, and then also the Commissioner of Public Safety, John Harrington. So I hope this goes forward. It's being also supported by the Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus, the Second Amendment Foundation, and the Firearms Policy Coalition. So some gun rights groups. But this will be really interesting to watch go forward, and hopefully it goes all the way, and we expand gun rights for everyone. So what else is on your docket of things to cover in Minnesota politics for people to get caught up on this week?
Well, you had a post. Let me see if I can pull it up here while I'm talking about it. That caught my eye, because it's pretty apropos to stuff that I've been working on my own, and that has to do with, here it is, the Raise Our Standards events that are taking place. It sounds like there's one happening pretty much as we record this down your way in Mankato, where the point is to try to educate people about the threat of wokeness and critical race theory intruding upon our schools. And it's a real problem. I've talked about it before here on the program about the infiltration of critical race theory into our district here in St. Michael Albertville. I'm currently working with a member on the school board up in St. Francis, who is confronting this. Their school board was told, it's funny. You would think that the school board, as the elected political representatives of parents, taxpayers, and residents, would be the ones who would be determining the direction of policy and the mission statements for various departments and committees and what have you. But no, the school board was told by the superintendent that she had formed an equity committee, which is, these groups of stakeholders that they put together to come up with ways to inject critical race theory into the school district. And this is getting started in St. Francis, which is, one of the most conservative areas in the state. And they're having to push back against it. They're having to, it's an open question as to whether or not they're even going to be able to push back against it. And so my point is that there's nowhere you can go where you're going to be safe from this stuff. It is a state mandate in Minnesota that your school district have some sort of plan, some sort of action that it's taking in pursuit of quote unquote equity. And wherever you live, I guarantee you there's a tireless minority who is more than happy to take advantage of whatever bureaucratic processes exist to try to drive this wedge, this particular camel's nose under the tent of your sleepy community.
Yeah. So this group is being promoted by there's a website actually you can go out. If you go to raiseourstandardsmn.com, you'll see links to all of their tour dates, and so they will be out let's say the 15th of June in St. Cloud and Alexandria and Moorhead. They'll be hitting northern Minnesota, and at the end of June they'll be scattered around the Twin Cities at multiple sites to get people engaged in this program. So you can learn how to go to your school board meetings and what to see and what to say and how to get involved in this fight from the conservative side and pushing back on this woke revolution. So you could also go out to the Omnibus Podcast Facebook page, and we'll put a link out there to this group. Yeah, they're doing great things. In the news this week, we also have a slew of protesters going up to protest the Line 3 pipeline in northern Minnesota. And this is just, I mean, to see the hypocrisy of all of these people driving their Suburbans up to the pipeline to protest fossil fuels, when there's already a pipeline there. Like Line 3 isn't some new thing that we're putting in. It's a replacement for an existing pipeline that is failing and that it is about to burst and destroy the environment. You know, we're not changing anything. We're continuing the supply that we use, that they use, these protesters use. It's like watching the protesters in their little plastic kayaks go out and protest an oil rig. It's like,
Right.
what do you think your kayak's made out of?
Right.
I'm on a weekly radio show for an hour, and the guest ahead of me, as I connected early, she was talking about microplastics and how, you know, we should be doing all this stuff to prevent microplastics. And, you know, I could see she's wearing a fleece when she's on the video. So I said, have you ever read the studies on all the microplastics that they've done around the oceans in Florida? And the actual microplastics that people are drinking and that are showing up in fishes, most of them, 80% of them in Florida, come from clothing. Because as you take your yoga pants and your fleece clothing, and even your jeans, which you can't even buy jeans nowadays that don't have spandex in them, right? As you wash that clothing, all of the lint that goes through your washer and down into your water supply and that the municipal water system can't recycle is microplastics. That's where it's coming from. It's not plastic bottles in plastic face masks. It's mostly from clothing. And that is, that's a big issue. But, you know, I asked her, so what are all these companies doing about the clothing? She's like, well, that's an issue. And you can buy this special bag that you put your fleece clothing in when you launder it, and any clothing that has plastic in it and Lycra and spandex and whatever, and then it catches everything. And then you can but it's hard to clean out of the clothes from this bag. And I'm like, sounds like it's pretty hard to wash stuff when the bag netting has to be so tight to catch the microplastics. Nobody's going to do that, but it's an issue, but it's fun to call it the hypocrisy. So these people up in northern Minnesota trying to shut down the pipeline, and I think that they want a spill. They want an environmental disaster because we're trying to safely replace this pipeline, and it's like $2.5 billion of private investment, all these jobs, union jobs, which Democrats love, the pipe fitters. I mean, all these unions and the 49ers, the heavy equipment operators. I mean, they're just giving us these elections as they go in and try to shut down commerce for industrial jobs.
Well, the thing that I've come to understand about the green movement and the true believers in particular, the kinds of folks who do this, who get into their SUVs and drive up to protest the fixing a pipeline, is, you know, this is kind of the modern day equivalent of ancient sacrificial rituals that has the same purpose. Like the whole term scapegoat, what a scapegoat is it's the sacrificial goat upon which you project the community's sins, and then you slay the goat and then pretend as though your sins have gone away. And that's exactly what this is. It's, nobody wants to. And there've been interviews with like college kids where they get challenged on whether or not they're actually going to make the sort of lifestyle sacrifices necessary to conform with the green policies that they say they support. And of course, across the board, none of them want to make any sort of personal lifestyle sacrifices. And that's what it is. They feel a sense of guilt. It's kind of like white guilt. They feel they've bought into a premise that makes them a conspirator in the destruction of the earth. And that makes them feel guilty. And so in order to alleviate that guilt, they need to find a scapegoat to cast their sin upon and then slay it so that they can then go forward, like sinners and boozers on a Monday morning after they've been to church on Sunday, and start fresh again with a new week of new sins lined up.
Well, I hope we can. I mean, it seems like every year we vote on whether to approve the pipeline. It's constantly caught up in the courts, but we need to replace this pipeline. We are slowly moving away from fossil fuels. It's not going to alter the path by replacing this thing, but we don't have 20 or 30 years to wait as we wean off fossil fuels. This needs to be replaced. Otherwise, we're going to have an environmental disaster. On Friday, it was the 17-year anniversary of Marvin Heemeyer's journey as he was long battle with his local city council in a corrupt town in Colorado. He decided to build a tank out of a bulldozer and drive it around town and destroy the city hall, the mayor's house, and city council members' businesses. And he went on for a long time. I mean, he was a welder by trade. So the city basically landlocked his business, and then basically said they were going to shut him down because he couldn't connect to city sewer because the property that he was going to connect through was owned by a company that wanted to buy his business, and they wouldn't give him the rights to connect. But it's a story of how government can drive people to do incredible things. And so it was also called The Killdozer. And if you want to watch a really good Netflix documentary, they did a documentary on it a couple of years ago. It's called Tread. So I would encourage people to go out and watch that documentary. It's pretty balanced in the way that it was designed and recorded. And, some people call him a hero. Some people call him a conspiracy theorist or whatever. But it's a good story that lawmakers need to learn from.
Yeah, I mean, look, as a public servant, and we both speak as one in different capacities, but you are tasked first and foremost with upholding the rights of your constituents, and respecting not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of the fountain of law, which is the U.S. Constitution, and upholding the rights which it was constituted in order to protect. And so the absolute worst thing that government can do is take action which violates those rights and act in ways which are discriminatory or corrupt in order to benefit favored friends or favored constituency groups at the expense of others. And knowing nothing about this situation, just hearing your summary of it, it sounds like that's the kind of thing that was going on. Was building a homemade tank and driving it through City Hall the best response to that? Well, I'll leave that to history to judge. But I can certainly understand why a guy would get frustrated to the point that he did if he had reason to believe that he was the victim of government corruption.
Yeah, and he left behind a bunch of audio tapes, kind of telling his story of why he did this, and I think it's a really good documentary. Also in the news this week, we learned that the Biden administration is going to buy 500 million coronavirus vaccine doses from the pharmaceutical giant Pfizer, and using taxpayer dollars, and then donate it to other countries in the world.
Oh, good Lord.
No, I grabbed the headline off the Washington Post because it says Biden administration to buy five, and I crossed off Biden administration and wrote taxpayers, right? Taxpayers are buying this. But for those few liberals listening to the show, you may recognize Pfizer as one of the causes of the opioid crisis, right? Pfizer and Johnson a year ago, a year and a half ago, were vilified by the left because they caused the opioid crisis. They were both had these multi-billion-dollar settlements for what they did in promoting opioids and over promoting them. So now all of a sudden, a year later, they are the heroes, and Biden is basically just writing them a check for, I don't know, it's about $8 billion. So we're gonna pay for these coronavirus vaccines for developing nations, and we are going to pay these pharmaceutical giants American pharmaceutical prices, right? We pay full fare for people in third world countries, as opposed to if Pfizer went to these countries and said, how much are you willing to pay? They're not going to pay much for them, but
Right.
we already paid for their R&D. So, it's frustrating to see this anyways. And I'm not trying to say that America should hog the vaccines. We should have them for us. I think that everybody that wants a vaccine has already got one. And so there really isn't many people here that left that want a vaccine. I say have at it. Let these other countries, have their vaccines, but we should not be paying for them.
No, definitely not. It's a thinly veiled political gift to Pfizer from the Biden administration. That's what it is. This is crony. I don't like using the term crony capitalism. It is cronyism, because crony capitalism isn't a real thing. That's an oxymoron. But it's a form of, you could say, soft fascism, where you have private corporations and public trust, government working together to the benefit of the private interest at the public's expense in order to further the centralized control of both. That's certainly the effect here. There's nothing good about it. And of course, they're going to try to spin it as, oh, we're helping the underprivileged and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, well, give it away for free then. If that's your goal, if you're really trying to help and there's no other interest involved, then give it away for free. Don't have the taxpayer on the hook, and make sure that people know that it came from Pfizer at the behest and expense of Pfizer stockholders.
Now, there's a there's a U.S. law that says when we buy a vaccine in America, we have, for every dose, we have to pay 50-cent tax. And now it's a 50-cent fee that goes into the a fund to pay for people that are killed or injured by vaccines. It's I don't know, it's handled by the vaccine court. And so I'm wondering if we are going to be purchasing those vaccine doses. Are we going to put money in the fund for the rest of the Americans that are injured, and then ship the vaccines overseas? I think that'll be interesting if we can find that out. Also interesting, I was digging into this. So Pfizer has a huge company. They had $9 billion in profit last year, but they also have 80,000 employees. Whereas Moderna was just started in the last decade. They only have 830 people before the pandemic started. 830 employees, this little itty bitty company, and they've just exploded under the pandemic, and how much profit they've made. So interesting enough. I'm for a free market for pharmaceuticals, but I don't think we should be paying for the rest of the world like we do for all of the other pharmaceuticals. Did you know that the St. Paul Public Schools just up and left, ended their school year, decided to throw in the towel because everybody was getting hot, and due to heat, they just decided to close it, and not even do online schools. They're just done.
What was their school year calendar? Because schools around here have been done for over a week, or about a week at this point. How long were they supposed to go? Do we know?
I think they had another week. So they had this week and next week. So they're done. I feel bad for the kids. They're getting shortchanged.
Yeah, I mean, there's just, my mind is tugged in multiple different directions, because yes, they're looking for any excuse they can. They had COVID for quite a long time, where they could be like, oh, we can't do school because of that, and now they pull out this heat thing. At the same time, really, what is the value proposition here? Like, what are you really missing by not sending your kid to St. Paul schools at this point, or Minneapolis schools? The the message, if you're a parent or a taxpayer, ought to be that they're not supporting you, so you shouldn't be supporting them. And that means using whatever means are at your disposal to get your kid out of the system, which is something that we're contemplating here in our home. In spite of the fact that we're in one of the best school districts in the state, we're nonetheless contemplating that. And also, when they come to you for these operating levies and these capital levies, and they're asking you for more money to be attached to your property tax bill, uh, just tell them no. Just say nope. Sorry, I'm not going to fund. I'm not going to fund an institution that exists for adults, because that's what it is. It exists for the sake of the adults who are part of it. It certainly doesn't exist for the sake of the students, and least of all, the parents and their values and what they want to inculcate into the next generation.
Yeah. Well, at the Minnesota legislature, we're preparing for a special session that's going to start on Monday. We have not come to an agreement, Republicans and Democrats, on how much to spend on E-12 or K through 12 education, policy or spending. I think the Higher Ed Committee came out with an agreement today. But of all like the 14 different working groups, they call them, since the conference committees are no longer, since we're not technically in session, the working groups, I think there's 14 of them. They've come up with an agreement on a couple of them. But public safety, healthcare, state government, all of these things, they haven't come to an agreement. So the rumor is we likely will not come to an agreement on Monday, when we must come back because Walz has extended his emergency powers for another 30 days. We have to come back so that we have the ability to end the emergency. A lot of people think we come back to approve his extension. No, we have the ability to vote on it. And the Senate, of course, will pass the resolution to end the emergency. On the House, we will make a motion to bring it up. And then we will not have the 90 votes needed to suspend the rules. And so we won't be able to bring it up. But that's where we're going to be on Monday. And then likely they will not adjourn that same day. It's probably going to stretch until June 30th, which is the last day of this fiscal year. So we start a new budget July 1st. And if we don't have the budget in place, then technically government shuts down. We always say that the government shuts down, but what it means is that non-essential workers don't have to go to work for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever, a month. And in the end, they always pay them their back pay anyways.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's kind of like a free vacation for the non-essential workers. And meanwhile, Republicans get just bent over a barrel because we're destroying the government, and that's we're the reason why you couldn't go to the state park.
Yeah,
The porta
right.
potties were closed or whatever. Meanwhile, I think the history has shown that the courts may step in and fund the state. And like the courts may say that government will continue to operate on 80% of its budget across everything. Well, if that's the case, I'm okay with that. I would like a 20% across the board cut, and I can go home. Kind of a permanent shutdown would be great, but we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah, I mean, Republicans need to decide, and I feel like I'm wasting my breath even saying it, but Republicans need to decide whether they are serious or whether they're just a party of clowns. Because if you keep falling for this Lucy holding the football routine, where every session you pretend like this time you might hold your ground, and then you get to the special session, or you get to the potential for a state shutdown, and the everybody comes out and calls you terrible names because you did what you know is right, and the state shuts down, and you finally just give up and say, okay, fine, you can have what you want. I mean, the Republicans or the Democrats have been taking notes on this stuff for decades at this point. They know how it works. They know that they're going to continue to be able to advance their agenda and grow government and grow the budget and expand all of their sphere of authority and dominance in the lives of everyday Minnesotans. They know they're going to be able to do that by just running this same play over and over and over again every session. The only way it's going to end is if you get off the carousel and refuse to play the game. The only way to win is not to play, right? Like that's what you're going to have to do. And maybe at some point we'll get a class of Republicans who have what it takes intestinally to make that happen. But somehow I'm not going to hold my breath for it this time around.
Yeah, and I mean, from what I understand, and I've talked to, Gazelka and Benson, I've talked to a lot of the players in this negotiation, is that the governor is just relentless on keeping his powers, and that he needs to keep not only the emergency, but he needs to keep the underlying Chapter 1231, emergency powers in place.
Right.
And so he doesn't want to give that up either. I want the Emergency Powers Act to be thrown out and, written to be very narrowly focused on fires and floods. And even then to not give the governor the ability to write law that he can go around and enforce. I mean, that's just stupid to have it. Why not just make him the judge too? And then he can throw people in jail, not just arrest them, but actually, sentence them. It's just stupid. So,
I'm surprised somebody hasn't done a meme with Tim Walz as Judge Dredd, because that would fit pretty well. He's the judge and jury and executioner.
Yeah, no, that's basically what he's almost there. So, but he's just, slams his fist on the table. He won't even talk about it. He needs those things. He's saving lives. And so, I have very little hope of actually solving anything at the end of session, because I don't think you're right. I don't think there's a lot of Republicans that want to go through a shutdown, especially, and I've mentioned this before, when Gazelka and Benson, who are key players in this, are both, vying to run for governor, and they can't have that, that bruise or that attack, and they couldn't have that, harsh mailer sent in their district about, or to anybody in Minnesota about how they helped shut the government down.
Well, and what they need to understand is that it's exactly the opposite. You're not going to be the candidate for governor if you're not willing to do that. I mean, that's where the base is at. Like, we want a fighter. Why do you think Trump did so well in this state? Why do you think he came so close to flipping it in 2016? Because he's like you? Because he's afraid of mailers? No, it's because he's willing to do whatever it takes to oppose the other side and to call them out and to condemn them on moral terms. You're not going to be the Republican nominee for governor, if you're not willing to do that. And if you somehow are, for lack of better options, you're certainly not going to win. You're just going to add your name to the long list of losers who've never accomplished anything in this statewide. And it's going to be because you kept you kept running the same play. It's the exact same problem. You keep running this this reactionary campaign where you're looking at what you're looking at what all of your political opponents are saying, and then reacting to that and trying to moderate with the standard that they set. And you think you're going to win? They're not on your side. Like, it's stunning to me that we have to have this intervention with Republicans to convince them that the left and the media are not on your side, so you probably shouldn't be listening to them and trying to get their approval. It's not going to happen. You need to run against them. You need to be running a campaign that condemns them, that paints them as the villains, and presents an alternative vision that's inspirational and takes the state in a new and different direction. That's what's called for in 2022.
Yeah, well, that would be great. I had a Republican colleague, legislator, text me this and say, "Can someone tell me one issue, one piece of legislation, anything that conservatives are winning on?" I can't think of anything. No. I mean, I really said, we're winning on losing messages, yep. and loser candidates. We're winning on that, where we excel at that. Yeah. And we also do circular firing squads better than the Democrats. But I really couldn't think of something that we are actually winning on. I mean, there are certain issues like the critical race theory or the defund the police that help us, right? But those are gifts from the Democrats where they give us that, you know. I mean, they gifted us that during the last election where the defund the police movement came out. And it was like, are you kidding me? I wanted to file a campaign finance complaint against Representative John Thompson or candidate John Thompson because he gifted the Republicans millions of dollars worth of in-kind contributions by going out into Hugo and telling him he's going to burn the effing,
Right.
you know, I mean, that was a gift, but it wasn't something we're winning on. It was something that they are losing at so bad
Yes.
that
Right.
it would help us.
Well,
Hillary was a gift.
And let's not be myopic about it though, because it's a gift that helps us win today a little bit, but it also serves the purpose of them putting a stake in the ground and saying this is where we stand, and then they continue to wedge the Overton window year over year, cycle after cycle, until eventually defund the police isn't crazy, right? Like, remember Hillary Care? Hillary Care was a laughing stock back in the 90s. Now we're a decade into Obamacare, right? So this is what they do. And so you talk about winning by accident, having the Democrats gift us things that temporarily provide us with a political boost. Recognize that, number one, the only reason it gives us any political boost whatsoever is because of the reaction from the people, not from the Republicans. It's not like the Republican Party of Minnesota and the caucuses in the minority or majority, respectively, in St. Paul are taking advantage of this in any significant way and putting out powerful narratives and making bold policy proposals and taking the ball and running with it. This is a fumble. This is like when you're the crap team that's playing the champions and the champions fumble and you manage to pick it up and get a first down. And then you sit there and pat yourself on the back like you're some sort of athletic, phenomenon. No, you got lucky. You're not going to start scoring points until you have a plan to score points, and Republicans don't.
Well, I give it a pretty low chance that we're going to end our first special session of the year next week. So we're going to come in on Monday, gavel in, and I'm not even taking time off of my private sector job because I don't think we're going to be voting on stuff until the evenings, if anything at all. And of course, there's just no negotiations on stuff. I am hopeful that I will get one important piece of legislation through. I mean, it's not that important. It's minor, but it's, as we talked about earlier with the medical cannabis registry and gun rights. I am working with some people on the conference committees to add legislation to protect Minnesota gun owners if they are, veterans on the medical cannabis registry. Anybody in the medical cannabis registry can't be denied a gun, permit to carry or a permit to purchase. And so that'll be good if we can get that through to fix the backdoor legalization bill that the Republicans in the Senate pushed. I also have a few other bills I'm working on trying to get some language in for, but as far as the big omnibus bills coming through, I just can't imagine anything being good. I'm probably going to vote no on every single piece of legislation coming through because I don't see anything good coming out of it. And there's actually talk of a bonding bill, for crying out loud. After billions of dollars have been raining down, not just on the state, but on every township and every city and every county in the state. There's like $8 billion in extra federal money, and they're still talking about borrowing more money.
Why not? Why not? What reason did they have to show restraint in that context? Right. I mean, this is the problem with the what Jason Lewis used to call marble cake federalism, where there's the intertwining of all the different levels of government. When you have the feds raining money, making it rain on states and municipalities, it only has the effect of them institutionalizing that new revenue and making it a permanent part of their plans going forward. And it creates the opportunity for them to pretend that there's a crisis when the federal money runs out. And they're like, oh, we need to raise taxes now, and we need to shift our budgets in order to maintain the services that people have come to rely upon.
Yeah. And I mean, I've talked to some county commissioners that they didn't even spend all their money from the last bunch of stimuluses they got, and they're running out of things to buy. Yeah. It's just crazy. And of course, the cost of building materials now is out of control. And all these bonding projects just spur more building. And I mean, you can't even find workers, and nobody wants to come to Minnesota anyways. So we need to fix our state, and I don't see anything coming out of the special session as being good. I just hope people can grow a spine and take back the governor's powers and restore the legislature as a co-equal branch of government. So, well, with that, we've wrapped up another hour, and it's a really good conversation this week. We'll probably have Shane back next week. And any other final thoughts, Walter?
Just that, do as I do, and get out of the house. Even though it's hot, take your kids out. Enjoy the weather, enjoy life. Get away from this stuff. Turn off your phone. It's a prescription. You're talking about medicine, talking about some wellness. We gotta remind ourselves why we're doing all this before we come back to the fight. Fight by all means, but get in touch with those values that are at the root of why we do what we do.
Right. All right. Well, thanks. See you again next week.